Hey guys, what we're going to be getting into today is the final part of Unit 3, which is the judicial branch. We've hit the legislative branch, the executive branch, now the judicial branch. Let's just go on and jump right in. We know, or we should know, that the federal court system is a three-tiered system. At the top, we have the Supreme Court, in the middle, the courts of appeals, and at the bottom level, the U.S. district courts. With judges and on all three levels, they are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. That's part of the advice and consent. They're appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and they serve life terms. Now, if we look back at why did the framers set up the judicial branch the way they did, we have to look at the articles. And what did we have before? And what did we have before? Nothing. There was no national court system under the Articles. And there was a debate at the Constitutional Convention as to whether or not we should even have a federal judicial branch, because those who were against a federal judicial branch said, we already have the states. Each state has their own court system. Why do we need to duplicate it and make things messier than what they are? And so what they ended up doing was they compromised, like they did with almost every other controversial issue. They put in a judicial branch, but they left it up to Congress to decide how it should be set up and how it should be defined. That way, if you look at my handy-dandy pocket Constitution, Article 3, we'll get right here, starts here, and it goes to this page. And that's it. That's the entire Article 3. Our entire judicial branch is set up by barely a page of my tiny handy-dandy pocket Constitution book. That's it. And so it's left up to Congress to decide the structure of it. Now, I just want to read just a little bit right now of the Constitution. This is Article 3. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. So, what this is saying, this is really vague. Hey, we're going to have a Supreme Court, and we're going to have other courts. And Congress can decide what these other courts look like. And then they can hold their office during good behavior. That's come to mean life. Now, federal judges can be impeached, and we'll talk about that later. And they have been impeached. About 15 federal judges have been impeached since the beginning of this Constitution. And then they get paid. And we will talk about this, what it doesn't mean, which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. We'll talk about that in just a couple minutes. But the main thing to think about is that the framers purposely left it vague. They left it up to Congress, to the people, to decide how to expand it, how to define it. They said, okay, we're gonna have a judicial branch. We're gonna have the Supreme Court at the top. They're gonna be let's have them serve for life, and they can have this type of jurisdiction. And okay, that's all we're gonna put. And so Congress, over the years, has had to expand and define what the judicial branch is going to look like. All this, like I said, is found in Article 3. Real short article. It's the shortest of the three branches. Article 1's the longest. Then we got Article 2, which is the executive branch, which is shorter. Then we get Article 3, the judicial branch, which is really short. Like I was saying, what does good behavior mean? What does it mean? We've come to interpret that as life, with the exception of being impeached. And then we have the question, why? We give term limits, or we have limits or terms for the president, for members of Congress. Why not members of the judiciary? Why do we have them serve for life? Well, the reasoning behind this is that if you can serve for life, you are independent from here on out. Once you get selected, or once you get appointed and confirmed to the courts, you can make whatever decision you feel is necessary, even if it is unpopular. You don't have to worry about your job. As long as you follow the Constitution and make decisions based on the Constitution, you don't have to worry about what anyone else thinks. Federal judges are independent of outside pressure. And basically, the bottom line is we want the judges to make the right decisions, not what the popular decision is or what's going to help or hurt someone. It's they need to make the right decision. Now, we're going to be reading some Federalist Papers in a couple days. And one of the Federalist Papers explains this in a little bit more detail than what I just explained about why we give judges life terms. Congress can't diminish salaries either. That's which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. What are we talking about here? You can't force judges to make less money. Currently, judges make somewhere in the range right about $150,000, $170,000 a year. You can't reduce their pay. And that's to prevent Congress from punishing the judges. Oh, you made a bad decision. Guess what? We're going to pay you $1 a year in salary next year. So you can't do that. Now, while judges serve life terms, most judges outside the Supreme Court take what we call senior status. When they have 15 years of judicial experience, and when they hit the age of 65, so that's what we call the rule of 80. So when their age and their years of experience hit 80, they can take what we call senior status. Senior status, the simple way of explaining it, is part-time. They retire, but then they work part-time for the courts. So they don't handle a full caseload. They are not a full-time judge. They are senior status. They take on cases as needed. It's part-time status. Jurisdiction. Jurisdiction simply means who gets to hear a case, who has the authority to hear a case. And there's a few different types of jurisdiction that we're going to go through now. We have original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction is who gets to hear a case for the first time. Original. If you're original, you're the first. So who has the power? Which court has the power to hear a case first? Federal district courts at the lowest level, the lowest courts, have original jurisdiction in just about every case. So every case, almost every case, will begin at the district court level because district courts have original jurisdiction. But in the Constitution, it specifically gives exemptions where the Supreme Court will have original jurisdiction. And it says it in Article 3, Section 2, Number 2. In all cases affecting ambassadors and other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. So, that if the case involves an ambassador and other ministers, and those in which a state is either the plaintiff or the defendant, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction, which means it bypasses the district courts and goes straight to the Supreme Court. Appellate jurisdiction is the authority to hear an appeal. Appellate appeal. And the courts of appeals, the circuit courts of appeals, that middle level, they only have appellate jurisdiction. The Supreme Court, for the most part, has appellate jurisdiction. There's some examples or some exemptions there that we just talked about, but for the most part, the Supreme Court has appellate jurisdiction, along with the courts of appeals. So with appellate jurisdiction, you only hear appeals. With appeals, you are not retrying a case. I'm going to say this again. With appellate jurisdiction or with appeals, you are not retrying a case. I'm going to explain that more when we get to the courts of appeals in the next video lecture. And then we have exclusive jurisdiction. Exclusive jurisdiction is the only authority to hear a case. If you're exclusive with your boyfriend or girlfriend, you're only going out with that one person. Well, exclusive jurisdiction is you're the only authority to hear a case. And in this case, the Supreme Court would have exclusive jurisdiction when it comes to ambassadors, because they are going to be the first and only court to hear a case since they're at the top. Now, I have a link that's in the description. It's from the Constitution Center. And the reason why I put it here is that in Article 3, it also has something else. And let me read it. In all other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. And so you have to ask yourself, what in the world does that mean? Both with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. Well, believe it or not, Congress has the power to exclude certain issues from appellate jurisdiction. So Congress has the power to exclude an issue from being reviewed or for being under the jurisdiction of the courts. Now, this website here, it's not too long. It just goes through that one little bit, Article 3, Section 2, about that sentence that I just read, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. Congress has the power to, like I said, exempt certain issues from being under the jurisdiction. It hasn't happened a lot. And there's actually another link that I will include on Google Classroom that talks about some cases in which Congress did this and how it's a pretty gray area, because Congress can't dictate they can't dictate constitutional issues. That's part of the judicial branch's constitutional authority. Congress can't pass a law saying the judicial branch, you don't have jurisdiction with the Second Amendment. Well, you can't do that. But with other issues, they can. And even though they can, it's still muddy and gray and complicated. These are the different types of jurisdiction: original, appellate, and exclusive. What I want you to do is go on and pause this video and go to the link in the description from the Constitution Center and just read through it briefly. It goes through, like I said, Article 3, Section 2, this part about jurisdiction. And read that, and then come back here. That was a good reading, wasn't it? I know. Something else in Article 3 is treason. Treason, that's Article 3, Section 3, number 1. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. So, treason is the only crime specifically defined in the Constitution. And you think, why treason? There's a lot of other crimes that are important. Why did they include treason? And why did they specifically lay it out and define it? Well, the reason why is history. The British, the kings, used treason as a way to get back at their political enemies. They said, "Oh, you committed treason. You went against the mother country, and so we're going to put you in prison." Well, we said we're not going to do that. We don't want to do that, and so we define treason as levying war or giving aid and comfort to the enemy. And then, in order to be convicted of it, there has to be two witnesses, and they have to publicly testify in order to convict, or you have to confess in open court that you committed treason. That's the only way to be convicted of treason: two witnesses who testify, or a confession in open court. But that went back to the history that the British were doing that to us, and we said, nope, not going to do it. Something else that's included, specifically mentioned in Article 3, is the right to a trial by jury. The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury. Done. That's what it says. Now, we know the Bill of Rights includes the right to a trial by jury and right to a trial by jury in certain civil cases, but Article 3 specifically mentions a defendant's right to a trial by jury. They put this in there. And, we know it's a very short section, very short article. So why did they spend time talking about a trial by jury? Well, it's a way for the citizens to keep a check on the government. That if citizens thought that the government was abusing its prosecutorial power in charging someone with a crime, we could have a trial by jury and the jury can acquit that person. So it's a check that we, the people, have on the government to prevent the government from abusing its power to charge people. And so they put that in there. That's kind of interesting when you think about it, why they're putting these certain things in the Constitution. It goes back to the history a lot of times, but it's also to keep us with, sovereignty. We have the final say in a sense, but it was a check to keep the government from abusing its power. That's what Article 3 is about. Short, very short, just went through it all. I read basically the entire Article 3 in this time. Now, it's left up to Congress to decide what these other inferior courts are. And so in 1789, we passed the Judiciary Act. And what that did is that kind of set some of the structure up of the judicial branch. And in the Judiciary Act 1789, it set up one district court in each state. The Judiciary Act said there's going to be 6 judges on the Supreme Court. Now, we know it's changed since then, but that's how they first set it up. And then they're going to have 3 regional circuit courts of appeals. And these circuit courts of appeals take on appeals from the district courts in each state. These regional courts of appeals had 2 judges from the Supreme Court and then the presiding judge of the district court. So it was a 3-judge panel on the circuit courts of appeals. So that's how they set it up. And today, it's similar. We have we have district courts, we have at least one in each state, we have courts of appeals, and then we have the Supreme Court. Now, what they do changes, it's a little different. Members of the Supreme Court don't sit on the courts of appeals anymore, but that's how they had it set up. Let's look at the lowest level, the district courts. There are 94 district courts throughout the United States. Each state has at least one. Each district court may have several courthouses served by federal district judges. There's almost 700 federal district court judges. Now, I'll give you an example. Missouri has 2 district courts. We have the Eastern District Court of Missouri and the Western District Court of Missouri. There's a courthouse in St. Louis, but there's also a federal courthouse in Jefferson City where a federal judge sits there. while other judges sit in St. Louis at the federal courthouse there. So each district can have several courthouses. It's not just one. There's approximately 300,000 cases that go through the district court level every year. Most of them are not criminal cases. Most of them are civil cases. And we're going to talk about the difference between a criminal and a civil case in a little bit. But there's 94 district courts. Each state has at least one. District courts have original jurisdiction. They are the trial courts. We call trial courts finders of fact. They are going to hold the trial. The appeals courts don't hold trials, and the Supreme Court, with a few exceptions, ambassadors and other public ministers, they only hear appeals. They are not retrying a case. That's done at the district court level. There's two sides. We have the plaintiff, who is the side that's initiating the action, and then we have the defendant, who is answering it. The defendant is the accused. And in a criminal trial, in a criminal case, the plaintiff is going to be the government. The government is going to accuse you, the defendant, of a crime. And we call the government, in this case, the prosecution. But that's what district courts do. They are the trial courts. This is where you call witnesses, and you have testimony, and you have opening and closing arguments. That's what happens at the district courts. District courts try federal crimes like mail fraud, tax fraud. There's a lot of violent crimes that occur, and most of them are tried in state courts. They could fall under federal law, such as bank robbery, drug trafficking. Those could be tried at the federal level. It just depends, but most violent crimes, just because they're violent and heinous, doesn't automatically make it a federal crime. Most violent crimes are actually tried at the state level. And in reality, they're at the local level is where they're tried at. Like here in Missouri, the 24th Circuit Court in Farmington. That's where, murderers get tried at in our area. In all criminal defense cases, the defense has a right to a trial by jury. In the burden of proof, the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that person committed the crime. Now, it's not beyond any doubt, not beyond, you are 110% sure. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. If you were to put that into a percent, we're talking about 95, 98, 99% sure. It's not just, I think he may have done it. It's all the evidence shows that he did it. There's no other explanation. There's no other reasonable explanation. He's guilty. Now, what you see a lot of times is what we call a plea bargain, where both sides, the prosecution and the defense, reach an agreement where the defendant will plead guilty to a charge in exchange for a lesser sentence. So maybe you were charged with murder in the first degree. Well, you could plea bargain and say murder in the second degree, and instead of getting the death penalty, you get life in prison. So you agree to plead guilty. In exchange, you get a lesser sentence. Now, this is good in one way because it saves time and it saves money for everybody. It's one less case to try in exchange for a lesser sentence. It's a bargain. It's a plea bargain. I will plead guilty if you give me something less. And that's what happens at district courts because they are the trial courts. Each of the district courts has a U.S. attorney. The U.S. attorney is picked or nominated by the president. They are part of the executive branch. They're part of the Department of Justice. So federal prosecutors fall under the Department of Justice, and they are under the leadership of the Attorney General. So federal prosecutors, even though it's part of the judicial branch, the court system is part of the judicial branch, the prosecution is part of the executive branch. 300,000 cases are brought. There's about 80,000 federal crimes. Of those 300,000, 80,000 are federal crimes. And most of those federal crimes are immigration and drug. Those are the top two. Number 3 is fraud. But most of these are immigration cases and drug crimes. District courts, they can also be a civil court. So we have criminal court, where the government charges you with a crime, but we also have a civil court. And a civil court is a dispute between two people. And they go to court, these two people go to court to settle this conflict. Now, most civil issues are handled by the state courts. There are some exceptions. If the value is more than $75,000 and the two people, the plaintiff and defendant, reside in separate states, then it can be a federal issue, and you can go to federal court with your civil issues. Disputes involving constitutional issues. Is this law constitutional? That's brought through the civil court system. That is a civil issue brought to the district courts. Now, constitutional issues is a law, lawful or unconstitutional. That is not decided by a jury. That's decided by a judge. So it's not really a trial where you have witnesses testify and the punishment can be, prison. That's not what we're talking about here. There is no prison with a civil court decision, and there is no trial by jury with constitutional issues. Now, sometimes we can have a class action lawsuit. You see those commercials on TV with Roundup and for Johnson & Johnson's baby powder stuff, that there's a class action lawsuit. And what that is that there's so many similar lawsuits, so many people suing this one person or this one company, that they combine all of them into one lawsuit. And that's what we call a class action lawsuit. So it's one big case instead of lots and lots of smaller cases. Just kind of combines and makes things more efficient. So civil court, there is no defendant. There is no crime involved. It's determining a conflict or determining a constitutional issue. So that's the difference between a civil court and a criminal court. There's a question. Can you sue the federal government? Well, yes and no. No, because the federal government and states operate under the policy of sovereign immunity, which means you can't sue the government. Sovereign immunity. You cannot sue the government. However, there are exceptions. If Congress has made an exception, then you can sue the federal government. And has Congress made exceptions? Yes. They made lots of exceptions. People can sue the federal government under certain issues. And in fact, they've made so many exceptions, they've created a special court just for suing the government. And we call that the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. The last thing I want to talk about is other federal courts. Now, these special federal courts, while they are part of the 3-tier judicial system, they're a little separate because Congress has specifically created them to deal with specific issues. And we call these legislative courts. They're not constitutional courts, which says we're going to have a Supreme Court and other inferior courts. These are other courts that Congress has established. And because these are not constitutional courts, because Congress legislated these, the president gets to appoint, they're confirmed, but they only serve 15-year terms. They do not serve life terms. Some examples of these special federal courts or legislative courts: we have the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, the U.S. Court of International Trade, the U.S. Tax Court, and then at the appeals court levels, we have the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Services, the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. And so these are special issues that don't really fall. They really don't go to a regular district court and the regular courts of appeals. They go to these legislative courts with these judges who serve terms, 15-year terms. That was a lot to take in, I know. But Article 3, short, but there's a lot. There's a lot to take in, ranging from judicial power, the salaries of judges, how they're elected. That's going to be in Article 1 and 2. The judicial power, original jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction, treason, trial by jury. Lots of things in here. What we're going to be getting into next are the other two levels of the judicial system, of the judicial branch, the courts of appeals and the Supreme Court. If you have any questions, email me, ask in class. We're going to be basing a lot of this. We're going to be basing a lot what we're going to learn off this information. And here's a big hint, since you made it to the very, very end, we are going to have a quiz over this. So whatever information you have written down and have added to the notes, you can use on your quiz tomorrow. Do not tell anybody. You watch this all the way through. And so, in fact, I will let you have a cheat sheet. And your cheat sheet is the notes. So whenever we take the quiz tomorrow, you can get out your notes and use them. And I will tell you, the questions are going to be in addition to what you see here. I'm not just going to ask you, give me one example of a special federal court, and then you write down the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. It's going to be some stuff that I explained and that you should have written down. And it could even be a question or two off the link that I asked you to go to in the description. So that's just a fun tip for you. Until next time, talk to you later. Have a good day.